Global goals for noble souls, transforming our world to a better wonder to behold. No poverty, zero hunger, for the elderly or younger. Good health and well-being, good education, empowering women to become sensation. Clean water and sanitation, is it not the right of every nation? Economic growth, inclusive and sustained, through industry, innovation and infrastructure be gained. Reduce inequality for sure. Make cities and human settlements safe and secure. Take urgent actions to combat climate change. Conserve like below water, land, ensure we do not estrange. Justice for all, a peaceful and empathetic nations. Let us all partner to achieve these goals and provide much needed salvation.
Hey everybody, thank you so much for joining. A very good morning, good evening, namaste, hola, bonjour, g'day mate, terve, and marapan. This is Namya Joshi, your host for the day. Welcome to episode 126 of the podcast Each One Teach 10, an amazing world of STEM, an inspiring venture where we'll be discussing that STEM is a part of every day for every kid. We all will learn together how to build that exact STEM culture. Well, think about this for a second. What if the place where a student feels like they truly belong isn't the classroom, the sports field, or even their friend circle, but a game? And what if schools are completely overlooking that space? Well, today's conversation sits right at the intersection of education, identity, and the future of student experience. Today, I'm really grateful to be joined by Elliot Mack, the co founder and CEO of Diagon Esports, who is rethinking how schools engage students by turning gaming into something far more meaningful. That is a space for belonging, confidence, and real world skill building. At Diagon Esports, he's also transforming how schools are engaging with students, turning their passion for gaming into structured after school clubs, competitions, and curriculum aligned leagues, all without the need of extra hardware. Today, Diagon partners with leading international associations like COBIS, BSME, IAPS, TAISI, and ISA, impacting hundreds of schools worldwide. But this isn't just about esports, it's about how we understand students and what we might be getting wrong. It's an honor to have you here today, Elliot. So, how are you doing today?
Great. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you so much. That's great. And how's the weather like today for you?
It's actually really good. I'm starting to warm up, so we're starting to get some really nice days. So I can't complain. How
That
about for
is
you?
great. Yep, it's getting warmer here in Finland as well, which is great. It's not that cold anymore.
Perfect.
Yep, thank you. Right, so let's get it started today. So, as a third culture kid, you've probably navigated different cultures, identities, and environments growing up. And I'm curious, did gaming ever become a kind of home or constant for you during that time? And how has that personal experience influenced the kind of spaces you're now trying to build for students through Diagon?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question. I think inevitably, every kind of digital platform in one way, shape, or form did become maybe a form of a home. I don't know about a home, but maybe more like a playground, or a third space, right? I talk a lot about third spaces that are not, your home or your work or school, and then where else do you kind of spend your time? I think inevitably for anyone moving around and having kind of loved ones and friends in different places, the digital playgrounds and platforms that exist today, whether that's just solely for communication or also, for playing and engaging with those people who are not physically able to be next to you, is definitely a huge part of that. I think specifically for gaming, the best thing is that, as much as you can kind of call and catch up with people and spend time just discussing, which I think is great, one of the things that you miss most when not being physically together is doing things together, right? Doing activities together. Like, that's very hard to reproduce. And I think that's one of the beauties of gaming in maintaining relationships, is that you actually get to do something, work towards a common objective, have fun, play remotely. And that's really kind of something that's hard to reproduce otherwise. And so it has definitely become, or it definitely has played a big part in maintaining, a whole set of relationships, especially with my friends. I think the way that personal experience shapes the environments that, we're building today, I think it shapes it in a couple of different ways. Most notably, one of my co-founders, Younes, I met, through a mutual friend, but we really became friends playing video games together, right? Because I think a lot of, obviously, except if you're training and competing seriously, a big part of any recreational activity, and gaming included, is while you're playing, you're actually talking about other stuff, and really building friendships and communicating, which is potentially different than when you go and play football, which is something else we do with Younes, where, we'll be we'll have that shared experience, but we won't be constantly talking about, everything and anything while playing. So I think that's kind of one core way that it's obviously shaped what we're building now, right? Just the fact that that's where effectively our first relationship as friends really started and grew. But it also shapes it in its concept, right? I've been playing video games with friends all over the world, a lot of them who attended international schools in different countries, and that's it's no random fact that was the case, and that today we work connecting international schools kind of across the world, right? So I think in both of those ways, it shaped its concept in a lot of ways, and it shaped also its idea. The idea for Diagon and the first discussions about what it became were while we were playing games, right, together. So it was definitely a huge part of the experience.
Certainly, that really shows the power of friendships, and also how those friendships can go into professional relationships as well when you work with people together who you align your thoughts with. And it's really powerful to see how you describe gaming not just as, entertainment, but as kind of the third space, almost like a digital home where like the connections happen beyond the physical boundaries. And of course, about shaping friendships and communications while allowing people to play, connect, and just simply, exist together, even when they're not physically side by side. That really highlights, I personally believe as well, the beauty of gaming, because it provides you with a shared experience that you can experience together with your fellow teammates and friends. And that really sounds like a sense of belonging. You're just playing, having fun, and catching up with people. And that really also is really amazing to see that it has influenced how you're thinking about building spaces like Diagon for students to experience that same kind of connection.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yep, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. Right, so you often talk about esports as a place for belonging, like we just talked about, which is such a powerful idea. But in a school context, what does true belonging actually look like to you? And how can educators recognize the difference between students just participating versus genuinely feeling seen, valued, and connected?
I think that's a great question. I think first we have to look at what does belonging mean in a school setting, right? I think like any institution that you become a part of by attending said institution, that institution has a culture, that institution has values, a name, and effectively also forms kind of part of a given person's identity, and especially in the case of school, right? So I think the first question is, do students feel like part of their identity is the school that they are attending, right? Does that shape or play into their identity? Do they feel like it is something that aligns with their identity? And I think on that first question, if they don't have a space where they feel like they can represent, right, the school, the institution, then it's hard for them to genuinely feel like it's part of their identity, right? A great way to build that sense of identity with an institution is just being a representative for that institution, right? Different bits of our identity, whether it's nationality, a sports club, whatever it might be, right? A big part of cementing that identity is when you represent it, right? When someone asks you, where are you from? Oh, here's where I'm from, and here's why. What team do you support? Here's what team I support, and here's why. Here's what I like about it. Here's how I belong to it. So I think that's kind of the first thing, is that identity. And I think esports, for a lot of students, as you kind of said in the intro, that won't get to be in the school play, which is one time where they can show their identity. I'm in the school play, right? That's the school's play, and I'm in it, so I'm part of the school. A sports team, that's the school sports team, I'm in it. Any other competition that kind of allows them to really shine, because there's two things, right? They need to be able to be in the team, and for them to be in the team, they need to be interested in being in the team and be potentially good enough to be in the team, or in the whether that's even in the arts, right? The school choir, whatever it might be. And so esports provides kind of a space for some of the students that don't fit any of those categories to really belong and identify with the school and make that part of their identity, right? It's the first time wearing the school badge. I think for a lot of the students that participate in our competitions, they had never represented their school before in anything, right? So that necessarily reinforces their identity as a member of that school and that institution and that community, and then necessarily improves belonging. I think that's kind of the high level aspect. I think one step below that, belonging, is also, do I genuinely feel like I have a space where I can kind of belong, right? Do I feel like there's a space where I can kind of, I have friends, I socially belong, right? Socially, do I belong there? Not just institutionally, not just identity-wise, but also socially, do I feel like I belong? And I think esports can give a space for a lot of students, and we've seen this countless. I shared a testimonial last week from one of our teachers on LinkedIn, where like you clearly, they say clearly like they belong. They felt like they now belong, right? They felt like they had friends for the first time. They felt like they finally had a space with others that share their passion. I think it kind of gives that social space as well. So I think on every level, esports can kind of create that space for belonging.
Absolutely. And I really like how you're grounding belonging in something that's a lot deeper than just participation. It's pointing directly at your identity. And the idea that students need spaces where they can represent themselves or the school and feel good at something and actually see themselves reflected in the environment really stands out. And what you're saying about esports creating spaces for students who might not traditionally fit elsewhere, that is really powerful, because it is not just inclusion, it's more about the reinforcement of their identity, because that's when it becomes a place where they can ask, is this where I truly belong? Do I also belong here socially? And for many, esports is a clear yes. So yeah, that's a really good point. Thank you for sharing that.
No worries at all.
Yep. All right. So moving on to my next question for you. Well, every startup begins with an idea, but there's usually a turning point where it becomes something much bigger. So was there a specific moment for you when Diagon shifted from being a cool idea to something you felt deeply responsible for, something that was impacting students at a higher scale?
Yeah, I mean, I think, from the beginning, from the first moments we organized anything with any school, we obviously felt responsible to deliver for that school, and those students that we were working with, even during our pilots, even during free events, right? From the get-go, we felt responsible. But I think if we're talking about feeling responsible at scale, that really came when we started partnering with different school associations to run their esports events, right? Because when we became the partners for COBIS, ISA, BSME, that was kind of the first year. Now it's like, okay, it's not just us that we are representing. We're also, delivering for that association, for that network of schools, and this is their esports event as well, right? So we want to make sure that we, we definitely felt we want to make sure that we deliver, and we definitely felt responsible for that event, which was across all of their schools, right? Every school could enter. Every school had that was going to be their first experience with esports with that association for every single school that entered, right? So that is quite a big responsibility, and we're fortunate that we've kind of renewed and grown these partnerships over the past 3 years, and that we've hopefully been able to live up to those responsibilities.
Certainly, and also it feels good that when that sense of responsibility really comes through, even like in the early phase where it was just like an idea, but it was something really cool that students and schools were really relying on, and the fact that you saw schools as partners and felt accountable to delivering meaningful experiences, especially like through those student events, that really shows how quickly it shifted from experimentation to impact. And that's when you really have like a passion for something, you want to work on it, and you want to work for the people who will be affected by it in a positive way, of course. And moments like those also shows that if it's affecting the target audience in a positive way, you really want to continue and make it better from just a cool idea to something that you genuinely care for and always show up for.
Definitely.
Yeah, right. And you also work with international schools across different regions and contexts, which gives you, of course, like a really unique perspective. So when you look at esports through a global lens, do you feel it's helping to narrow opportunity gaps between students, or is there like a risk that could actually widen them in some ways?
I think this is a great question. I think it depends on what scale you look at. That's the first thing, right? Are you looking on a through a school-based lens, right? If you're looking at a given individual school, and the opportunities between students, I think it's narrowing the opportunity gaps, right? Because of what we said earlier, it's like all these students had ways to feel like they belong, represent their school, find their passion at school, make sure they're represented, etc. Some of those students who were passionate about video games and esports didn't have that opportunity necessarily, and now they do, right? So in that sense, that gap is narrowing. Now, I do think that if you look at between schools, right, a school that has esports and a school that doesn't, potentially there is a widening of that gap. Now, I think one great thing is that there's some challenges with esports, like hardware, for example, but one great thing and one approach that we've always tried to take is making sure that we can help schools get started with the hardware they already have, as you mentioned. And so hopefully, while the gap necessarily is widening, right, because you have one school kind of taking on a new technology, giving new opportunities to their students, and then others not necessarily following suit. So it's kind of inevitable. Hopefully, it's not a gap where it's like impossible for those other schools to then tomorrow say, I want to turn around and start offering those opportunities as well. So yeah.
Of course, and that really makes sense as well, because you're not just treating esports as, automatically equalizing it, but it's really dependent on the context, like you said, because when it's at the individual school level, it is great to see how you describe students getting the chance to discover their identity, their passion, their niche, what kind of opportunities cater to them. But when you zoom out, that's where you see the real tension, because you can see schools that have access to esports programs that can pull ahead of those who don't. And that's where you can potentially notice the widening gap. But it's great to see that you're pointing out the start that you need to start with students that already have it instead of holding back. And then of course help people with the kind of resources they have to utilize them at the optimum level so that it's very practical for move forward instead of losing momentum, just because you need to start from scratch. It's great to utilize the already existing resources and do well with those and then go ahead if it works out well for you. Right. Also, I was curious, like there's still quite a bit of skepticism when it comes to gaming in education, like from screen time concerns to questions around its real value. So, from your perspective, what's a criticism of esports in schools that you think is actually fair and something that the space needs to take seriously?
Yeah, definitely. I think the important caveat in this question is esports in schools, right? If you had asked me what's a criticism of esports or what's a criticism of video games as a habit, right? Like for me, that would be a slightly different question. But I think if we're looking specifically at the criticism of esports in schools, which I'm making the assumption when answering this question that it's hence a thoughtful program that has a meaningful goal with structured time, adult and teacher supervision, because it's at school, then that's a very different question. And my genuine answer to that question is that it kind of depends on your belief system. And what I mean by that is that if you are an absolutist, right? If you believe that, for example, that any screen time is bad, right? Like if you genuinely feel, and I've heard this from some people, right? Like we don't want students on screens. Well, there's two things. There's if you're an absolutist, and then if you're an idealist, I would say then probably I think some of your criticism is valid, right? So if you say, well, we don't want our students on screens at all because we don't think we inherently think that screens are bad, regardless of usage, regardless of the amount, regardless of everything, then yes, I mean, esports has to happen on a screen. So that's a valid point. If you don't want your students on screens at all, then that's a fair criticism, right? Yes, esports requires students to be on screens. That is time when they're not outside. If you are an absolutist and you would want your students all the time outside or all the time on pen and paper, then that's a fair critic. The second is the kind of idealistic view, in my opinion, at least, or if you're an idealist. And it's like, well, in an ideal world, we would want all of our students just, again, outside reading, only reading books and only doing productive tasks and only, and not having phones and not playing video games, right? Like if you take the approach of what you wish the world was rather than what it is, then also that is a valid criticism, right? Like I think to an extent, a big argument and a big conversation we have is this is a passion for students, right? So if you're not, you're not looking at the reality of, student passions and the reality of students' interests, and you're saying, this is what I would want it to be, then that's fair, right? But the reality is that students are passionate about this. And if you take what I would call the realist approach, then I genuinely don't believe that if it's structured, right, with an educational purpose, so building skills, building belonging, having fun, especially if it's after school, that there's nothing wrong in that, and that it's moderated, right, by a teacher, and that it's in moderation as well, right? We're not saying have students play esports every hour of the day. We're talking about sessions, just like anything else, right? You wouldn't want them playing sports all day. Then I genuinely don't believe that there are any valid criticisms to bringing esports into schools. Again, with the caveat of your kind of own belief system, but having said that, I genuinely don't believe that there are any valid criticisms. Again, it's just my opinion, but yeah.
Certainly, I believe so too. It's more about balancing it out, like you said, that you need to know where to use it and when not to. And of course, I also see the tension between different belief systems that really stands out. Whether someone sees screen time as inherently harmful or holds on to a more idealized version of what learning should look like, and looks very different according to that. And when you're pointing to something that is important, the schools are expected to be thoughtful, intentional, and supervise spaces. So those concerns aren't entirely misplaced. But at the same time, there's needs to ground decisions in the reality of students' lives and their passions today, rather than just an ideal version of what we wish things looked like. So it's important that you be realist, You see what is needed, look at the scenario at the moment, and act accordingly, other than just thinking of what is right and what isn't. And certainly at this point, I think esports is something that's going to make things a lot more engaging for students and help them pursue their passion, which can, of course, turn into a great career because it provides a lot of options for students to grow as a professional individual.
Definitely.
Yeah. So, if I ask you a fun question, what is your go-to vacation spot?
Well, my go-to vacation spot, I don't know if I have a go-to, to be honest. I would probably have to answer my family goes to Brittany in France, my French, every summer. My grandparents, my family has been going there for over 60 years, generations. So that would probably have to be it. It's a little island called Belle-Île, off the coast of Brittany. So yeah, that would
That's
probably be
nice.
my answer.
That's pretty cool. For me, it's back in India. There's a state called Himachal Pradesh. I'm a nature lover, really like to visit the mountains. But since I'm here in Finland now for my university, I probably want to visit that again during December when I get my winter vacations. Yep,
Nice.
that's the one for me. But yeah, thank you for sharing that. Pretty cool. And I'd love to end today's great discussion on a longer term reflection. So, when a student participates in an esports program and then moves on, maybe 5 years or even 10 years down the line, what is something that you truly hope stays with them beyond just the experience itself?
I think number one is the skills that they build, right? So communication, creativity, problem solving, resilience, leadership. I think those skills, get built for life and are useful across all areas of life. So that would be number one. I think number two would be hopefully the confidence and the kind of, again, social belonging that they felt, right? The friends and memories that they made ultimately, because that carries on also in life, right? I think everyone has seen what a student or anyone really kind of finding their space, finding their thing, flourishing effectively can do for their everyday life, but also for kind of the trajectory of what they then go on to do, right? That self-belief, that confidence that, hey, I belong, I'm good at something, I can make friends, I can do this, I'm supported, I have a community. So yeah, probably those two things.
And certainly, I totally agree with that. Like confidence and of course skill sets are really crucial, and the sense of belonging always helps you understand that you fit in a space and you can grow in that space, and you have people around you who support you, and you yourself support yourself as well. And of course, I think today's conversation really explored how gaming and esports creates belonging, shapes our identity, and of course builds friendships across boundaries. And we discussed esports as a meaningful space in schools, balancing opportunity and access, while also acknowledging the valid concerns around, the repercussions if not used in the most optimum way. And ultimately, it's about highlighting the importance of meeting students where they are and creating spaces where they truly feel seen. So, thank you so much, Elliot, for this amazing discussion. And I'm sure the audience has a lot of takeaways to take back today.
Thank you, Namia. Thank you for having me again. And hopefully, I at least shared one thing of interest for anyone listening. So yeah, thank you for having me.
Of course. And thank you everyone for joining. And I'll see you in the next episode. Till then, each one, teach 10. Have a nice day.
Bye-bye.